We've got some more exciting news in the PulseChain ecosystem. Richard Hart, in his court case against the SEC, has just filed a motion to dismiss all the claims, all the allegations. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through what he actually said in the dismissal. I'm going to summarize everything, and I'll give you my 2 cents on the whole thing, why I'm still bullish and I still believe in this ecosystem. Stick around till the end, because even if you're not in PulseChain yet, this case affects all of crypto. And, just because it's not your coin right now, doesn't mean that you're not next on the chopping block, because the SEC is really going after everybody out here. They've used many arbitrary and capricious arguments and are very overreaching in their regulation by enforcement actions rather than clearly defining a new rule set. And we've seen this with similar cases like Coinbase, Ripple, Binance, Justin Sun. They've sued so many different people. And although oftentimes it does end in just a simple settlement, oftentimes it's not just what they're doing, and they're actually infringing on your personal freedom of speech to be using decentralized finance and using blockchains as open source publishing software like they were intended. PulseChain's a clone of Ethereum 2.0. So PulseChain being called into question as a security actually has ripple effects, no pun intended, immediately for Ethereum itself, right? It's literally a clone of the code base of Ethereum, just like a lot of other layer 1 blockchains are out there. And in the case of PulseX and HEX, these are simply smart contracts built on top of a blockchain. So stick around with me till the end, because when you understand what this actually is, that we're just talking about blockchain networks and smart contract code that lives on top of these networks, you'll actually realize that they can't really be shut off by a central middleman at all. But then we're going to touch on the best case and worst case scenario for Mr. Hart here, and what is cooking in terms of his defense and some people in support of him as well. So what's going on with the case? Let's go over it, all right? The motion to dismiss has some superior fact patterns to other cases, which means basically they think it has a higher probability than average of actually being taken seriously. Now, let me tell you right now, I'm not a lawyer, neither am I a financial advisor, but I do believe that even if this motion to dismiss does have a higher than average likelihood of being accepted by the judge, it's still very, very typical for motions to dismiss to not go through and for the court case to continue anyway. So I wouldn't get your expectations too high. If I was betting, I'd probably put it at maybe a 10% or 20% chance of going through versus, what typically happens, which might be a 1% chance or lower. All that this means is that there's pretty solid arguments here, given the facts that this allegation is worthy of being dismissed. So here's the file right here. We can go dive into it. We'll start with the table of contents right here. So the background involves the parties. The parties are the SEC is the plaintiff. The defendant is Mr. Hart. HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX are all called out as software, but in the SEC's allegation, they claim to be unincorporated alter egos of Mr. Hart, which is very, very confusing, very unfounded to claim that decentralized software is actually an entity, an unincorporated alter ego. It doesn't really make sense. The 11 lawyers in Richard's case defending him from 5 different law firms all across the USA, some of them with a lot of history working with the SEC, they all seem to agree that that's a far-fetched assumption. And then finally, they're talking about the alleged misuse of assets from the PulseChain sacrifice. This one's actually pretty funny, so stick around. That'll be at the end. There's a great quote in part E right there. But first of all, if you want to get caught up on all the news, on all the latest in this dismissal, okay, I'm going to summarize part 1, which is that the court lacks personal jurisdiction over Mr. Hart. The complaint fails to establish a personal jurisdiction regarding the HEX software. Also, it fails to establish personal jurisdiction regarding the PulseChain and PulseX transactions. The motion to dismiss says that in this context, it would not be fair, reasonable, or consistent. And then they end with saying that they failed to establish jurisdiction over via the alter ego entities, which I just mentioned. So we've got jurisdiction number 1. Number 2 is that the SEC has failed to plausibly plead the existence of domestic purchase, sale, or offer of securities. So they're claiming a securities sale in connection with anti-fraud claims. There are 2 different things being claimed: unregistered securities and fraudulent spending. Now the defendants, Richard's team, is citing some very, very specific case law to basically explain that the SEC fails to satisfy the anti-fraud claims under the Morrison case, that Dodd-Frank did not override Morrison for the anti-fraud actions, and even if Dodd-Frank did override Morrison, the SEC fails the conduct and effects test. We're going to dive into those very quickly, and we're going to try to simplify things to decipher the legalese. B, the SEC fails to allege a domestic sale, meaning within the USA. And C, the SEC claims should be dismissed because the transactions are predominantly foreign, which is probably true. Cryptocurrency is a global movement here. Transactions are always happening all over the world. People use Uniswap in India, China, South Africa. It doesn't matter where you are. Blockchain software is decentralized. It's global and it can't be shut off. Well, real crypto anyway. So number 2 is talking about the failing to prove the sale or offer of securities. Number 3, this point talks about the complaint failing to state a claim for securities fraud. The defense says that there's no deceptive act or fraudulent scheme. There's no claim for any fraudulent omission. And the complaint fails to allege scienter, meaning prior knowledge of wrongdoing. And finally, we've got the SEC's factual allegations regarding the challenged expenditures are implausible because they are impossible. This one's really funny. They're basically saying Richard Hart, he spent all this money, but the timeline in which they said he spent money versus when they claimed that he raised money, quote unquote, wouldn't be possible because they were saying that he spent money before the actual action of the raising money took place, which there's a good quote in here later on. All right. Number 4 is that the complaint does not adequately allege that any parties entered an investment contract. This has been very important in the Coinbase case, for example. So the SEC is required to show that HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX were investment contracts, when in reality there was no contract being signed by any individual investor. There was no email sign up. There were no people entering a form or paying with a credit card or anything like that, The SEC also fails to allege that any purported investment contract was created through HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX software. Solid arguments to be made. And number 5 as well, the complaint unconstitutionally infringes on the First Amendment. So they're calling into question the First Amendment. This is a very bold claim because we've seen First Amendment violations go all the way up to the Supreme Court sometimes. I mean, it really depends, but the First Amendment is the most important in the USA Constitution, arguably. It basically means freedom of speech, the freedom to say what you want without, an authoritarian dictatorship telling you what you can and can't say. So they're saying, A, the complaint's reliance on Mr. Hart's speech for penalizing him infringes on his First Amendment rights. They're saying he can say whatever he wants because he has freedom of speech due to the First Amendment. And also that the inherent features, B, of HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX warrant First Amendment protection. The conclusion at the end, let's follow along here. I'm not going to read the entire 69-page document, but what you can do, guys, you can take this and copy-paste it into something like perplexity.ai, or you can copy-paste it into something like ChatGPT if you want to get a summary and you don't want to read 69 pages of legalese. I don't blame you. This is actually a very helpful tool. Another example of AI really leveling the playing field in terms of everybody getting a better understanding of the legal landscape and legal battles, which were, before AI, they were very scary and mystical to people because, well, not a lot of people want to take the time to even bother to understand. Not a lot of people can understand all the references to different cases, all the big words. It's almost kind of like finance, right? Finance used to be exclusive because it was this club that almost developed its own language. The legal landscape is very similar, but with the internet, with AI tools, it's really democratizing all this information and bringing the power back to the person. So it's pretty cool, I think. So you can do this yourself and make your own conclusions. That's what you really should be doing. Think for yourself, make your own decisions, whether or not you actually think Richard Hart did anything right or wrong, because it can give you more confidence that either you think Richard's going to beat the case, which would be a win for all of crypto, or it might allow you to think through what's really the worst possible case scenario here. In my mind, it sounds like the worst possible case is a fine, and judging by the very nature of PulseChain, HEX, and PulseX being decentralized with no off switch, they can't stop people over in Europe or China or India from buying this stuff via any DeFi on and off ramp in their native countries. The SEC is trying to police the whole world right now, when really their power should be limited to the USA. So I'm going to read some highlights for you here, okay? The SEC is suing Richard Hart, who lives in a foreign country, and somehow suing the blockchain programs, PulseChain, HEX, and PulseX, which are open source communications technologies used by a decentralized community of thousands of people throughout the world. Yet the SEC says that he violated securities laws by offering what the SEC has a novel construction. They call it a crypto asset securities. This word didn't exist until very recently. So this crypto asset securities word is not clearly defined even by the SEC, it seems. The SEC also asserts a fraud claim against PulseChain blockchain network for Mr. Hart, allegedly using a small percentage of so-called offering proceeds in a way that the SEC doesn't like. The SEC's claims suffer from a host of fatal defects under the U.S. Constitution, federal securities laws, rules of pleading, and more. The case should be dismissed without prejudice, and this would be the best possible scenario because dismissed without prejudice means he can't be tried again for the same exact things. Okay, it means you can't mess with me in this unfair way again. So first, the jurisdiction thing, right? The lawsuit cannot even escape the gate because exercising personal jurisdiction over Hart does not even apply in this case. Mr. Hart lives abroad. He hasn't lived in the USA for over 10 years. Now, I don't know if he's a citizen of the USA still or if he renounced citizenship. Maybe he's a dual citizen. But the fact that he's clearly a citizen living in a different country for many, many years and hasn't even set foot in the USA, they say, during the relevant period, means that, the lawsuit potentially might not even be able to begin. Now, again, this is all with the optimistic glass half full. It's not often that motions to dismiss, pass on the first try. I'm just giving you the arguments in defense, in favor of the defense. So these are Mr. Hart's legal team. Remember that. Remember that this, what I'm reading right now, is from the Mr. Hart defendant side, not from the allegation plaintiff side, which is the SEC. So they also talk about how there's some unquantified number of participants in the USA, so that can't satisfy the requirements of personal jurisdiction, and that, the defendant himself didn't have any employees, any contracts, any payment accounts, any marketing efforts, no travel expenses associated with Mr. Hart going to the USA. He didn't hire anybody. I don't work for Mr. Hart. I don't work for any HEX incorporation. That's just silly. None of the people talking about these decentralized cryptos have any person that they go to work for. Okay, there's no building full of people getting paid. There's no contracts. We're not getting paid to talk about this stuff. That's what I think some people find so hard to believe. All right, second, they're also talking about how it's not a domestic, there's not proven to be a domestic securities transaction, meaning because of the amount of participants that are potentially foreign, that this might not apply domestically. Congress has not established the SEC as a global blockchain regulator. Kind of like I said earlier, they're not the policeman of the whole world, even though they seem to act like they are sometimes. With these reckless enforcement actions, we could see the SEC in this case and others sometimes operates as if it is the global regulator. It has not been given power by Congress to be a global regulator. So basically it says they haven't done anything to support that there were domestic transactions, and also it's predominantly foreign in nature. So even if there were alleged transactions happening, they did happen mostly in a foreign country that, again, the SEC doesn't have jurisdiction of, and they could not identify any domestic transactions. Going back to the third point, they failed to do the basic pleading requirements for the fraud scheme regarding PulseChain. So what the SEC's obligation to do, if you're going to allege fraudulent schemes here, is they have to come up with spelling out very particular facts that prove a strong inference of fraudulent intent. But it doesn't allege that any deceptive content was said by Richard Hart. On the contrary, it actually, if you go read the original complaint, they basically just reference the same old things that Mr. Hart, has said over and over and over again, such as, I don't work for you. You should never have expectations of profit from the work of others. Mr. Hart's been very, very vocal and very, very consistent about not giving expectations to anybody, deliberately trying to fail the Howey test. So it says the SEC cannot sneak fraud in its claim by claiming that individuals had expectations. I mean, how can they assume whether or not somebody had expectations? Are they mind readers all of a sudden? And so the complaint basically makes clear that no expectations were ever set. I mean, how many times has Richard said, you shall have no expectations of profit. I don't work for you. He said that on repeat for the past 3 years. Longer. Basically the entire time that he was building anything. He would build the stuff and he would let it go. And then he would say it's up to the community after that to kind of take things into their own hands. If you want to see these things do well, you go do the work, because I'm not giving you any work, any of my personal time. And so the whole expectations leg of the Howey test is probably going to be very important here. Fourth, they alleged about the software programs constituting as investment contracts, but the defendants are saying this is not plausible because the SEC fails to provide any contract at all, let alone an investment contract. There were no contracts. Like I said, there were no people signing pieces of paper. And it says, unlike recent cases with other digital assets, the SEC didn't find any alleged plans for using these digital assets to develop new technologies. How common is it for all kinds of founders in crypto to make wild promises saying, I'm going to do this much marketing, this much is allocated towards, funding research, this much goes to paying the dev team. It's funny, almost every single crypto project has like a pie chart breakdown of where all the money is going. Basically, a lot of those are at very high risk of securities violations, because you're literally saying, here's what the money I'm raising is going to do, so you can expect that I'm going to go give this money to some kind of marketing team. None of that ever happened with HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX. I mean, there was no magical pie chart, which everybody was used to, which again is probably why it was so controversial in the first place. A lot of people were addicted to their promises from other founders and other crypto projects that are just luckily skirting by under the radar of the SEC, maybe because they didn't get popular enough, or because they didn't have a founder wearing Gucci tracksuits at the mall. But let's be honest here, guys. It is basically the norm in crypto for founders to give promises and say, hey, see this 20% of all the tokens? That's going to go to marketing. And that literally breaks the Howey test. Richard never did any of that. I think that's what people were very confused about, in hindsight. People were like, where are my promises, bro? And people still demand promises today from Richard Hart, and they get upset when he doesn't give them. So it's kind of funny. So it says they resort to Richard Hart's descriptions of how the software programs work. And he does talk a lot about how the programs work, what are the design intentions. After the fact, after building them, he'll talk about what they do or what they did, but not about future forward-looking statements. It's very good luck finding some forward-looking statements from Mr. Hart. And finally, the unconstitutional First Amendment infringement. So they're saying, hey, you're infringing on Mr. Hart's First Amendment rights just for talking about his views on technologies, blockchain, decentralized tech. It also threatens to stifle free speech uttered on the blockchain. Basically, the code itself is publishing software. So they're saying, look, blockchain code is publishing software. When you publish information to the blockchain, it can be transaction data, but hey, you can inscribe art into there. You can have whole political movements. We've got the Texan token, who's actually created their first crypto endowment political movement on the blockchain. We've got hundreds of NFT artists. We've got people like the HEX racing team, in the UK. There's a whole entire racing team out there whose livelihood is threatened. Basically, the recreational activity that they like to do and the fact that they like to base their recreational activities around crypto, around this particular crypto, they're now at unnecessary risk because of something completely unrelated to them, that the SEC is basically destroying, again, the livelihoods of any creators. Not just transactions, but we're talking about NFTs, art, political movements on the blockchain, and all kinds of other people that might have, let's say, done promotional content in their own free time related to HEX, PulseChain, and PulseX without being paid or anything, but just by professing their interest in these technologies. They're now incorporated into this unethical complaint or allegation. So I could bore you with all this, but at the very end we go and we see all 11 lawyers from all 4 different epic law firms, guys. Really, really good. Go look these guys up if you want to go to the last page and see who exactly is defending Mr. Hart. I mean, one of these firms was ranked the scariest lawyers of the year. I didn't even know they give awards for that, but he's got a lot of lawyers from New York, California, Texas. I mean, they're all from all over the place. And, essentially they're also really leaning into the fact that blockchain software should be looked at as publishing software based on previous case laws and should be protected under the First Amendment because blockchains are freedom of speech. Transactions are basically speech when you think about it. You vote with your money on what you think deserves your economic energy. If you can't buy a plane ticket to go travel to another country, then your freedom of movement is restricted. If you can't donate to a political party that you like, then your freedom of expression is severely hindered. And a lot of people's freedom of expression out there right now, again, I'll refer to all the artists and all the builders that are building things on top of the blockchain, freely expressing themselves via code or via, in real life, recreational activities or whatever it might be, political movements, NFT art. Their freedom of expression is being hindered due to the miscategorization of these things as unregistered securities. So there's a lot more people harmed than just Richard Hart, which is why I believe this case in particular has far-reaching implications for all of crypto. So even if you don't like Richard Hart as a person, you should want him to beat this case because the greater enemy here in this case is the SEC versus all of crypto. Again, it could be your coin next on the chopping block. The SEC, we've already seen the SEC in the Coinbase case. They allege that coins like Solana and many other popular blockchains are also securities. And just because they're not going after those particular blockchain networks right now, they're going after Coinbase, the company, because it's an easier low-hanging fruit to them to go after a centralized company. It doesn't mean that they can't just go ahead and attack all 10 or 12 of those blockchains that were deliberately listed in the Coinbase. Look right here. The SEC is going after Coinbase and calling out 13 cryptos by name, including Solana, Cardano, and Filecoin. So if you think you're safe in one of these other blockchains, you're not. They're trying to shut down all of crypto here. They're trying to restrict all of crypto to be regulated by centralized middlemen, which crypto is invented to get rid of. It's like as if they're trying to put the Great Firewall of China around the internet. That's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to stifle the most important innovation, separation of money and state, freedom of value transfer. They're trying to diminish this innovation, which in my opinion is the most important thing since, the internet democratized information. Imagine if we got things wrong with the internet. Imagine if the internet in America today looked like the internet in China, right? With firewalls up, and imagine we didn't have VPNs. Imagine everything was censored and you could only look at a few government-sponsored and approved websites. You wouldn't be getting real information. You wouldn't be getting the best and most truthful and accurate picture of everybody's thoughts and everybody's collective consciousness. And it's the same with transactions as well. If you can only spend money or write code or make art in approved, sanctioned ways, that basically strips away the core of your American freedom. And this has ripple effects globally as well because it creates this chilling effect where if one country does it, if one of the most powerful countries in the world starts censoring cryptocurrency and making crazy draconian laws like this, then you can bet that probably other countries like the European Union, other first world countries are going to hop on board. And that's not a world that we all want to live in. We want to live in a free, open, permissionless world where anybody's free to build blockchain software, build on blockchain software, and transact freely. And there's so much more you can do with the blockchain, right? Look at the very first Bitcoin block. There was encoded a newspaper article about the bank bailouts in the 2008 financial crisis. You can encode a lot of information into blockchains. It's not just sending Bitcoin or sending Ethereum from person A to person B. There's far-reaching implications of these draconian measures. And go follow Nuclear Herbs on Twitter. This guy's an actual lawyer, well, retired lawyer, but he's basically saying what I am, that is bad legal precedent takes years or decades to overcome, if it ever gets overcome at all, and it can kill this entire industry. So we should not be taking this lightly, guys. Now is the time to act. Nobody in the space should sit this one out when there's a chance of the SEC actually trying to set a very bad precedent for all of crypto. And again, guys, you've got this thing raising the attention of some serious lawyers out here. Sasha Hodder, a very smart pro-crypto lawyer, founder of Hodder Law Firm. She's even got her eye on this, saying Richard Hart's wrote a nice motion to dismiss worth a read, and she's excited by the fact of the freedom of speech claim, saying that I think the HEX people will win because of the jurisdictional issue. So, I mean, this is from a lawyer, okay, thinking that this is actually a legitimate, I mean, only the jurisdictional issue. Remember, that was 1 out of 5 issues in the motion to dismiss. Again, you could summarize it if you want, put it into ChatGPT. But Sasha over here believes that the jurisdictional issue might be maybe the strongest argument there. So guys, there are some things you can do to help the case, and that involves filing more amicus briefs. Now you can officially file an amicus brief through a law firm if you so choose. I mean, it depends who you are, but if you're an organization or an individual that has a vested interest in making sure that crypto freedoms are protected, reach out to some lawyers, or lawyers if you're listening, write some amicus briefs in favor of the defense. I mean, this is Richard Hart here, and his tweet is basically saying, stop being so oblivious. I've been in crypto long before you. I will be here long after you. He's sharing the knowledge about what you can actually do to protect yourself and to make sure bad laws don't get made. So he says, smart lawyers, get to writing, pro First Amendment articles, and use this document right here as a starting place and add some more interesting ideas on how freedom of expression might be affected if the false allegations get what they want. I'm going to end with this quote from the Richard Hart tweet right here. He says, you're lucky that they directly sued a cryptocurrency with a great fact pattern and named the cryptos directly. HEX, PulseChain, PulseX, which makes their intent more obvious. He says, good precedent benefits everyone. Bad precedent harms everyone. So be part of the solution, get the word out. Go tell this to your local, mainstream media news source. Try to get mainstream influencers on board if you can, or at least mainstream crypto articles, and just explain what's going on. This video is basically just to tell you what's going on, why this case is so important. And I love the quote that he ends with here. He says, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not socialist. Then they came for the unionists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. So, what does that remind you of, guys? World War II, very famous quote, inaction can be just as bad as compliance or being complicit in the evil act. So he ends again with saying, look, lawyers and those that pay them, if you have a couple of extra dollars laying around, maybe you're a little bit more wealthy and you know some good lawyers, you actually have a chance to make a positive impact through amici, whatever you want to call them, amicus briefs. Now is actually the time to file amicus briefs. We're filing one very good one already through ICANN. And just so you know, ICANN is the nonprofit law firm for SEC overreach. So this is exactly what these kind of guys defend. And we've got one amicus brief already coming in from ICANN. Okay, that's in defense of Richard Hart, of course. But the more the merrier, guys. The more the merrier. The more smart people with well thought out, articulated arguments coming from wherever, politicians, Congress, well-known law firms. It's to defend your freedom of speech. It's to defend cryptocurrency in general. And it's really important, guys. So, of course, I'm going to be optimistic and hope that the motion to dismiss goes through without prejudice. But again, guys, we can't fully expect that. We have to assume the worst and just make sure you know this isn't a guarantee of anything happening. It's still very, very early. We have many, many months in order for more things to happen in this case. I mean, the next big date for this case isn't until August, okay? So they're really taking their sweet time here. I don't know why they're dragging so long in this particular case, but it's gonna last for months, okay? So this gives everybody time to act accordingly, preferably in favor of your First Amendment rights. I don't think anybody in their right mind should be against this or on the side of the plaintiff. Because, if a bad law does get made and there was something you could have done to stop it and you didn't do anything, again, it's almost like you're complicit in creating a worse world and not a more free and open world. Now, at the end of the day, I understand what PulseChain is. It's a decentralized blockchain network run by over 50,000 nodes worldwide. Hundreds of people are running this network worldwide. It has nothing to do with Richard at all. I understand other facts, like the fact that Richard Hart has never made a single commit to any of this code. like the fact that PulseX and HEX are simply code that lives on top of the PulseChain blockchain, you got to understand what you're holding. And really, at a fundamental level, these things don't have an off switch. They're not going to bang on 800 doors of all worldwide global validators. And if they did, wow, that would be a pretty dystopian world because, you know, if they could do that, think of what they could do to Ethereum next. But understanding that real decentralized crypto has no off switch, they can't stop you from buying it. The SEC is corrupt. In this case, they want to strip away the everyday person of their freedoms. And anybody loosely even affected by this should care. If you have any interest in using crypto or any hope for the future of crypto and decentralized finance, real DeFi, okay, not middlemen, centralized fake crypto, okay, Robinhood, PayPal, Coinbase, these are all just centralized middlemen. But if you have any interest in the future of real decentralized crypto and all the opportunities that it brings, all the innovation, all the potential mad gains, monetary gains, life-changing potential wealth, don't let it be stopped by a stupid law and a false allegation, which when you read through the allegations, it almost does become comically bad. I'm going to end with one pretty funny part of these allegations, okay? Just to show you how kind of silly and frivolous this whole thing is look at what the SEC is actually claiming. All right. They say that Richard Hart in August 2021 began making these illegal purchases from Mixer transactions, allegedly, that he was using Mixers and buying all this stuff behind the scenes in August. Okay, August. Now fast forward to January 22. This is when they allege that the transactions that went into the Mixer from the Sacrifice wallet actually took place. So they're saying all these Mixer transactions happened in January, but he was using that to buy stuff, 5 months ago in August or 4 months ago. So this is pretty funny. The SEC claims that Mr. Hart somehow began spending the proceeds of the Mixer transactions 5 months before the proceeds existed. This cannot be. The SEC alleges that Mr. Hart purchased cars and watches, not time machines. So what do you think, guys? Do you think Richard Hart's a time traveler? Do you think he's being unfairly treated in this case? Let me know. And of course, do whatever you can, if it's in your power, to get an amicus brief filed with a lawyer. This matters for all of crypto, guys. Like, subscribe, share the video, leave a comment. See you on the next one.